is awarded across the $100,000 grand prize, as well as providing provincial and territorial prizes. So as a community, you may end up not being the most active community in Canada, but you could be the most active community in Alberta and still receive a prize. Let's talk about this year's grants. So the grant window is open from January 17th. So that's next Monday, up until February 21st, which is another Monday. So giving you that full weekend is needed to put those final touches onto any of the grant applications. One of the changes this year is that the grant dollar figure has increased from it used to be $250 to $1,000, and this year we've upped both the minimum and the maximum. So the new range is $500 to $1,500. The expectation is that local organizations host and track activities from June 1st to June 30th. And so that if you do have a wonderful event that is getting people active, but it's happening on May 22nd, we unfortunately cannot provide you with funding. The activities must take place during that month-long window. That being said, if you are hosting an 8-week-long event, starting in May and ending in June, every single Wednesday night you're hosting some sort of session, you can still apply for funding to do some additional supports in those June sessions. So it's okay to have your events precede the month of June and go after the month of June, but there must be some physical activity taking place from June 1st to June 30th. We're also, another interesting piece of information, we've got some feedback from our grant applicants last year saying that they would love to see a copy of their grant application. And how we designed the background infrastructure was that it wasn't readily made available to you. And so we figured out how to make that work. And on Monday or Tuesday, early next week, you will be receiving an email that will come through SurveyMonkey. And that SurveyMonkey email will look a little bit different than your regular participation emails. We don't have all the bells and whistles for all the formatting, but it'll encourage you. There'll be a button that says apply here to apply for your grant. And that SurveyMonkey email has a direct link back to your email, just how, I'm not a computer programmer, but it's coded back to you so that by clicking on the link in the email and then filling out the application, you will receive a copy of your application. You can still apply. We'll still have the big Apply Now button on our Participation Community Better Challenge webpage. But by going through that venue, just going to our website and clicking Apply Now, you will not have access to your application after you submit your application. And so we encourage you to apply directly through that email that we send you. If that email gets lost, that's totally okay. You can go through the Community Better Challenge website, and all of these submissions will still be reviewed by our review committee. So let's talk about eligible groups. So this is who can apply for a grant. And so there's a few different groups there. There are schools, municipalities, national sport organization, multi-sport organization, provincial sport organization, local sport organizations, and then community not-for-profit organizations. So all 4 of those groups are eligible to apply for a grant. If you are an individual who does not have sort of a company or a group insurance, you unfortunately are not able to apply for a grant. But if you are in if you are in a group, and some of the big things are having either a charitable number or a business registration number, having that group insurance coverage is important. Then you can apply for a grant. And one of the things that has always been the case within our participation grant funding, and is even more so the case this year, has to do with looking at your application and seeing what can we do to help serve those equity-seeking groups, to encourage, to reduce the barriers so that they can be more active in physical activity. Well, we know, statistically and just generally speaking, equity-seeking groups tend to have lower health outcomes than non-equity seeking groups due to those various barriers or limitations to being physically active. And so when you're planning your grant application, that's going to be one of the big questions. One of the big things for you to consider is, how can we reduce those barriers? Who can we partner with? Who in the community can we reach to ensure that equity seeking groups are able to participate? We are looking to fund as many accessible and inclusive events as possible. And so when I speak to equity-seeking groups, I'm speaking about women and girls, newcomers to Canada, people with disabilities, older adults, the 2S LGBTQI community, and the Indigenous community. So it's just something to always think about, and we will ask directly in the grant application, how will you be making your event accessible and inclusive? So I've talked a little bit about these guidelines already, but just to reiterate, the application must be completed online by February 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The reason that it's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time is if you do have any questions or you need some technical support, we can provide it up until then. If you're looking at February 21st at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, unfortunately, we won't be able to respond over email or over the phone. And so it's I encourage you, as with all applications, to give yourself a little bit of a grace period to make sure that you can navigate the online system. We've done our best to make it as simple and straightforward as possible, but we know that technology does have its challenges here and there. I mentioned before that the activity must take place from June 1st to June 30th, and that recipients must track their group activity on the website. A few slides from now, I'll show you exactly what that tracking form looks like. It is the same as the 2 years previous. At the end of the program, so in early July, we'll be sending all Community Better Challenge organization registrants and grant recipients a survey. And so we ask you to fill out that survey. It will be sent to the email that's used in your registration process. And that is very, very helpful for us to understand what works and what doesn't as we continue to modify, adapt, and improve this program for years to come. Lastly, this webinar is, I'm not going through all of the eligibility guidelines. That is currently posted on our website at the Community Better Challenge section of the Participaction website. And so I encourage you to read through the full guidelines to get a full understanding of the granting process. Let's talk about some of the fun stuff. So this is what can be funded when you are putting together your grant application. Some of the things to think about are sporting equipment, coaching, trainer expenses, venue or space rental, any costs associated with hosting a virtual activity. We're not exactly sure what June will look like in terms of what will be allowed within the realm of public health and public health guidelines across the country. And there's a potential that your event may need to be virtual, or you may just want to be virtual, having success over the last 2 years running these sorts of events. And so any costs associated with that kind of virtual activity. So perhaps that's some computer equipment like a headset to have that really clear audio, or perhaps it's a month-long Zoom registration so you can have more people access your Zoom account or your webinar at one point in time, are certainly within the realm of what we can fund. We also have the costs associated to meet any sort of public health guidelines. So maybe that's stickers or signage around keeping social distancing, or perhaps that's PPE or PPE for the volunteers and staff running the event, or even for the participants. If there's if there's a mask requirement, you can provide masks to the participants. Whatever is needed within that realm to keep people healthy, active, and safe is certainly within within what can be funded. The final two bullets for this really speak more to that health equity seeking aspect of what we're looking at. And so we know each of these things can be a barrier to participate in a different physical activity event. So transportation is a big one. If you're hosting an event that is outside of the realm of like a regular public transit loop, you may consider hiring someone or hiring a company that can transport people from their location to the location of the event in order to participate. Or if you're having an adult-focused event, some adults may not be able to participate because they have children at home and they cannot leave those children at home alone. And so providing that childcare service is also something that you can request funding for to make that event as accessible as possible. Nutrition and accommodations to support people with disabilities, be that through sign language or a closed captioning service for a virtual event, or having personal assistants, staff on hand, are all, again, within the realm of what is possible. And we encourage you to explore those options and asking yourself that question is, what can we do to make our event as accessible and inclusive as possible? What can't be funded? you'll see that this list is significantly shorter than the list of what can be funded. And so really it's there's three things here. There's performance fees. And the example that I'm using for this is if you're thinking about hosting an event and you want to spend 100% of the allocated funds, you're asking for $1,000 and you're going to give that $1,000 to a guest speaker as their performance fee. And let's say the guest speaker is doing a lecture on the benefits of walking, but the actual event is everyone sitting in an auditorium listening to the guest speaker. This would not be an event that Participaction would be particularly interested in funding, as the majority of the time is spent with audience members being sedentary, not being active themselves. So that's what we mean by a performance fee. It's giving 100% of the funds to one person. And so just trying to think about what are the events that can get as many people as active as possible. Other things that we can't fund through this are capital expenditures. So that's renovations, construction, sorts of things. And then any deficits incurred from past activities. How do you apply? Is, as I mentioned before, we'll be sending you that email directly through. It will say, it'll have a SurveyMonkey at the top. And so that will be the easiest way to connect in. And then there's an online application form. We encourage you to fill it out. There's a few additional fields, around your name and organization name and address and city and a few other details around that, whether or not you'd like to receive an event kit. The core of the application really comes down to these 4 questions. So these are things that you can think about today. You can start jotting down some ideas. It's what are you doing? What is the event? How will you use any of the funding? How will participants be active? And how will you make the event inclusive and accessible? Most of the other questions that we ask are kind of short form field questions where there's not that much of a thought process into the answer. You know your organization name, you know your address. These are the 4 questions that require a bit more thought and a bit more nuance as you're creating your answer. A few notes: the application cannot be saved as you go through. And so one of the things that we've done is we've made it available on our Participaction website is an offline question form. So it has the questions, it's in a Word document, you can type in your answers, and when it comes time to actually fill out the online application, you can copy and paste them right in. And you can use that Word document if you're collaborating with other staff members or other volunteers around exactly what you want to say. Here's some of the timelines for when we're hoping to establish this whole process. So we've established January 17th to February 21st. Right after that, so starting February 22nd, the Participaction review team will be reviewing all of the grants, scoring and assessing them, and we'll be informing all of the applicants about their application status, whether or not it's been approved or denied in mid-March. We will then work with our finance team to process and sign and mail. We'll physically mail all of these checks to you in that mid to late March period. And so it's very important in that address section of the grant portal to indicate an address where there is someone in place. We know from our experience last year, we did mail some of the checks to the head offices of organizations, but the offices were working remotely. And so thinking about with that address, making sure that someone will be there to receive the mail in mid to late March. And the last thing that we encourage you to do is cash that check upon receipt. Again, this is something that's really helpful for us on just sort of an accounting side as a bit of a verifying check to make sure that, yes, you have received the funds, that it did go to the right place, that it didn't get lost in the mail. So we like to see all of that. And we know that it hasn't been lost. We've heard from years past where applicants would say, "Oh, we did we get a check? We're not sure, and then we found the check in August, and can we still cash it?" Sort of thing. So it's best to cash it right away, even if you're not planning on actually spending the money for that for the equipment or for the venue rental until May or June. It's totally okay. Cash it, hold the funds in your bank, and then spend it later on in the year. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the application changes for those that have applied back for the last couple of years to know what's been changing for this year. this is exciting stuff. We're really excited to announce some additional funding that we received for the Community Builder Challenge Grant through Sport Canada. So Sport Canada is providing $60,000 for programs that exclusively support women and girls in multi-sport opportunities. This is on top of our regular grant funding. So so what that means is, as a grant applicant, you can still apply as you with your planned activity if that is not specifically within this description. So if it's a regular event, a fun run for all ages across your community, you can still apply. You still have access to the same amount of funding as you would have in previous years. This is an additional $60,000 from Sport Canada. And so if you do have an application that is connected into this criteria, so it's women and girls in a multi-sport opportunity. And as an organization, you don't need to exclusively serve women and girls to be eligible. And so, an example can be if you are working at a high school and you have an intramural program, you could extend that intramural program to have a girls only session on Thursdays at lunch. And that first session could be, your first sport could be trying or exploring basketball. And the second session could be exploring badminton. And so you're looking at girls only doing 2 different sports is certainly fits within that criteria. And so it's just something additional to think about as you're putting forward your ideas to say, is your organization equipped to hosting a women and girls exclusive multi-sport event? And if so, knowing that there is some additional funding that you would be eligible for that others may not. So just would perhaps increase your likelihood of being funded. The second thing I mentioned a little bit earlier is that our grant ranges have increased. So from $250 to $1,000 up to $500 to $1,500. And I do want to put a little note and a little caveat here. In our previous grant experiences, we have seen a large majority of organizations have requested the full amount of funding. So, maybe 80% of organizations said we could use $1,000 for our program. And in years past, one of the things that we've tried to do is be able to provide some support to all qualified applicants. So that means if you applied for $1,000, we may have only provided you with $600 or so. And that's simply because the amount of requests for funding exceeds our supply of funding available. And so one of the things to consider is identifying, and I put it there in the text, is remember to apply for what you need, as we have limited resources. So just as you're going through your granting opportunity to say, yes, we could certainly use $1,500. Do we need $1,500 to run our event effectively? Maybe not. And just keep that in mind for our review, for the reviewers, and for your likelihood of being funded. If you ask for what you need, you will be more likely to receive funding. And one of the this is another really fun new addition for this year, is we are going to establish more community connections. Typically, at the end of the grant cycle, when the grant recipients are announced, we get some questions saying, we want to collaborate, we want to connect with other organizations within our competing community who are participating or are interested. We want to, create a calendar of events so people can work together. And in years past, we've said we unfortunately can't provide that because we didn't ask you. This year, we're putting in a little checkbox to say, do you give us permission to share your contact information with others in your community? Which I think is an exciting opportunity to really bring that community together. So if you're comfortable with having information shared, not across the country, not across your province or territory, but just within your competing community, we encourage you to click yes to that little checkbox within the grant application. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about some high quality applications that we received from years past, just as you're thinking about what are some ideas that you could do. So one of the examples was yoga in Edmonton. So this is yoga classes designed specifically for persons with disabilities and limited mobilities that accommodate wheelchair users. So this is, like I said before, thinking about diversity, accessibility, and inclusion, thinking about connecting with health equity seeking groups is a major part of this granting process. Another event I have titled Dancing in Toronto. So women and girls were invited to attend a cultural dance workshop that focuses on confidence and empowerment. This is one of, I didn't have enough space here to write about the full event. We actually did a blog post about this event because there's a second half of it. So the first half was engaging women and girls in a cultural dance. And then a second half was on a self-defense workshop. So just a really cool hybrid of events, all focused on gender empowerment. And the third event we've identified is cycling in Wood Buffalo. So this was through a community bike lending program, and this was done in the height of COVID-19 during June of 2021, where those group activities were not allowed, where indoor activities were not allowed. And so what the organization did was lend bikes through this kind of a bike lending library to community members to use. And they made sure that they were fitted and outfitted and had all the necessary safety gear in place to be able to use those bikes. So certainly stretching a bit of the creative bounds around what can we do to keep people active during a pandemic. A few other examples can really come at a community-wide level. So this is speaking a little bit more to municipal leaders or as an organization who's connected to a municipal leader to make these suggestions. When we talk about the broader community challenge, really bringing the whole community together is very important. So to have that municipal leadership supporting the schools, supporting the recreation center, supporting the sports clubs, and all of them talking together to say, like, we're working together to be named Canada's most active community is a great thing to see. So one of those events that recreation centers have done is it's called a Toonie Tuesday. So perhaps at a recreation center, there may be a typical drop-in cost, to come in for the facility for a day of $10. And then every Tuesday for the recreation centers, they drop that down to $2. So people can participate at reducing that financial barrier. We were really happy to see last year Amherst, Nova Scotia and Sackville, New Brunswick participate in a community versus community challenge. So those two communities are on the border, they're neighboring communities, and the recreation programmers from each challenged each other to say, we think we can track more minutes than you. And each week, Participaction was able to provide them with a report with an update so they could use, in their social media feeds, in their announcements, again, connecting through the mayors and the city councilors to talk about, to motivate their communities to be active. And in fact, through that engagement, both of those communities ended up being finalist communities in their provinces, and Sackville was named the most active community in New Brunswick. Another event for for municipalities to consider is community activity bingo. And so this could be done again in concert with some of the grant events. So if there's a school hosting a public event and a sports club hosting a try-it day, as a municipality could coordinate all of those events and put it into a calendar or put it into a bingo card. And as a resident would attend those events, they'd get their card stamped. And however they want to do it, if it's a four corners or a line or an X or a full card sort of thing, award an individual prize or a family prize for any participants that get enough stamps on their bingo cards. So just a few different creative ways of thinking how beyond just my organization, what can we do as a community to tie all of this together is something to think about. And I know this is just a small sampling of this. We'll be hosting additional webinars in May to talk a little bit more about kind of organizational tracking and event planning and a few other ideas around this. This is just to start those wheels turning. So let's talk a little bit about the challenge before we end off today, and then we can answer any of the unanswered questions from the chat and from the Q&A section. So the challenge itself, 3 things to know. I've talked about it a little bit before. Individuals track their personal physical activity on the Participaction app. Organizations will track their group activity on the Participaction website. And we do have frequently asked questions posted currently on our website, as well as a few other resources. By and large, the 2022 challenge is going to look very, very similar to 2021. So the dates are the same, June 1st to June 30th. There's prizes for each province and territory, and we still have those same tracking components as we've had in years past. Individual tracking, as I mentioned, is taking place on the Participaction app, And one of the great benefits that we included in last year's challenge, which will continue into this year's challenge, is being able to see your community standing. So looking at the screen, looking at the image on the left, you can see when this screenshot was taken from Greater Sudbury during the community challenge, so sometime between June 1st and June 30th, Greater Sudbury was ranked 39th in Ontario and 171st nationally. We do have a leaderboard on our Participaction website, but that only shows the top 10 or 20 communities in each province and territory. However, on the Participaction app, you can see you can see your community and your exact listing. So that's a really exciting thing to do. And just as a little aside, the Participaction app is used year-round. So it's not strictly and exclusively used during the month of June. You can download the app today. You can start tracking activity today. You can start winning weekly, monthly, and quarterly prizes today. We do have additional challenges throughout the year. Coming up on February 7th is our True North Challenge. So again, this is all about individual usage, but the more community members you have using the Participaction app, all of their minutes based on their postal code automatically go towards your community score. So it's great to start thinking about that today, to tell your friends and family, and to start getting people into the Participaction app. And the upcoming True North Challenge is a great start. Group tracking. So this is for those organizations that are hosting events on behalf of a group. So that can be a school, phys ed class or a recess. That can be a sports team with a basketball practice. That can be a sports club or like a golf course, for example, where they're going to have hundreds of golfers come through a day. Any of those activities where there are large groups being in one space, all participating in a group activity, can be tracked by the group or by the group organizers. And so they would go to the Participaction website during the month of June, and they would fill out this form that's shown on the right of your screen. So it has a few of the details there saying, what was the event date? How many individuals took place in your activity? And on average, how many minutes were they active? Followed by a gender breakdown. And it's worth noting, we've tried to make this, again, as simple and streamlined as possible for the group organizers. We don't need to know, participant 1 was active for 10 minutes and participant 2 was active for 15 minutes. It's an average. And so maybe you have a 30-minute fitness class and there's 25 attendees. 25 times 30 is all we need to know. And that's 750 minutes for the physical activity that goes towards your community score. And the gender breakdown is also an estimation. We don't need you to sort of fill out any forms or have people self-identify their gender coming through the door. That would be unreasonable. So I'm almost through the presentation. Having done this a few times before, we do come across some frequently asked questions that I want to address now, and then we'll see from the group if there's anything else to address. So the first question is, how do you define a community or a competing community for the Community Better Challenge? By and large, that's defined as your local municipality. More specifically, it's a municipality that has 1,000 people or more. Now, if you are from a municipality that has less than 1,000 people, do not worry, you are still eligible. All of your minutes count. Every single postal code in Canada is connected to one of our competing communities. If you are a smaller municipality, we've either connected you to a larger municipality that has more than 1,000 people on their own, or grouped you with similar, very close in proximity, like geographic proximity to other communities that are near you to get to that 1,000-person threshold. If you want to know what competing community you're in, if you're not totally sure, download the Participaction app, put in your postal code, it'll tell you right away during the month of June. Can organizations win the grand prize? And so the answer to that is no, or at least not directly. Organizations and individuals, so every single organization and every single individual and family participating in the challenge, all of their minutes go towards their competing community score, which is connected back to their local municipality. When we identify Canada's most active community, we're in touch with that local municipality through their mayor, city council, through their recreation directors. And we provide them with that check of $100,000. We also provide them with an impact report identifying these are all of the organizations that contributed to your success. What they do with that money is totally up to them. Can organizations track group activity on the app? No. So there is all of those group activities where we're looking at, the average, 25 people times 30 minutes, all of that takes place on the website. Only your personal activity is taking place on the app. What if my event needs to change? We got a lot of this last year with the different public health guidelines coming into play across the country, and also just in general. There's there's rain delays, there's smog warnings, there's heat advisories, and so if your event needs to change it. is the short, simple answer. We want you to keep your participants safe. We want you to do the best that you can to promote your physical activity. When we decide to reward you or award you with a grant, we are in part awarding the specific idea, but we're more so awarding the organization, and we trust in your ability to know your community best, to know what adaptations you need to make. So perhaps it's changing it from an indoor to an outdoor event, or changing it from, the first weekend to the second weekend. Whatever you need to do, change it so that, again, your event is accessible and safe. And we ask you as best you can to ensure that the event is actually being hosted in June, so that when you do track it, it can contribute to the community's overall score. And then there is another thing within the Participaction app where there is a Teams function. And some organizations said, we as an organization want to get all of our, we want to put our team in. But that whole Teams challenge within the Participation Community Builder Challenge is focused within the app. It is focused for individuals. And when we're talking about team members, this is more about friends and family and coworkers, as opposed to, again, using that group fitness examples of, your 25 people all participating in your group fitness class. Those teams are limited to 8 people. And we'll go over a bit more about, some of the nuances of that tracking and about the Participaction app and the different challenges as we get closer to the beginning of the challenge in May. So in addition to this webinar, there's a few other things that we'll be doing to support you throughout the year. On your Community Builder Challenge grant application page, there will be a checkbox saying, would you like to receive a physical event kit? Yes, that kit is a box full of fun. So I'm not exactly sure what will be in the kit this year, but it is those physical pieces of material. So maybe it's a banner or a poster or buttons. Again, I'm not totally sure what's inside this year. But that box will all be branded with Community Builder Challenge names and logos and ideas, so that when you do host your event, people will clearly be able to connect it back to this challenge, and hopefully get involved and ask you about it. And then you can tell them all the other ways that they can be active over the course of June. We will have a planning guide, so an event planning guide that will provide you with tips to plan, promote, host, and track great events, to host virtual events, to host those in-person events, just some different ideas and thought starters of what you can do to make those events accessible, inclusive, and safe. We also have a grant hotline. And so if you look at, when you go to our website and download the grant guidelines, there's a link and you can book a 15-minute meeting with our outreach coordinators. And they will happily talk with you about your grant ideas to help shape exactly kind of what you can do to make your application wonderful. And then even after the grant window closes, as you're planning your events, just to answer any questions that you may have. And so we had great success last year through that grant hotline. We had lots of people booking and asking those questions, and we greatly appreciate having those conversations with you. And one more thing, this is more specific for your municipalities, which can be big leaders in these community events. We will have some specific resources for you as well that will be posted on our Participaction website. So more details to come as they arrive, but those will be available as well. That is it for me. We're coming up on our time. My contact information is there. Again, my name is Ken Zolotar. I'm the Manager of Stakeholder Relations at Participaction. You can see my email at kzolotar@participaction.com. My phone number is 416-644-0800. 0498. I greatly appreciate hearing from you. As I said at the beginning, this challenge cannot be done without you. we are so thankful for your support and for your energy. We love seeing your pictures and videos on social media about how you're getting your communities active. And so anytime you have a question about how to make this more effective, or if what you're doing is okay, feel free to send it my way or to our outreach coordinators. Feel free to give me a call, ask any questions. Over the course of the challenge period, sometimes people call and say, I'm really sorry to bother you. And I say, no, this is the most important thing I can do today. Helping clarify all of the details of the challenge, that you are clear and ready and energized and excited to go to get your community, is the most important thing I can do any day. So please, please, please give me a phone call and let's have a chat. With that, I do see that there's a couple of questions and things in the chat, so I'll do a quick scan and I'll do my best to address those. I know we're coming up on our time, but if you do have to go, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you as well. Okay, I'm just scanning through the questions. And so one of the questions was, for nutrition, would the cost of a dietitian be covered? And so the answer to that is most likely yes. I would think it depends on the event. And when we're talking about nutrition, I think the original concept was thinking more on kind of water and food and snacks. That would be like healthy nutrition. So if you're hosting an event, let's say you're doing a 5K fun run, and at the end of the event, you want to provide people with, water bottles and bananas. Great. we highly encourage you to spend money on food. Thinking about an event with a dietitian, I think a way to make that work would be to connect whatever the dietitian is talking about or sharing in terms of information, be paired with some element of physical activity. And so there's a question asking about, is their group eligible? So their group is a neighborhood association. And the answer to that is, I would encourage you to look at the eligibility guidelines. I think as a neighborhood association, if you do have that account, so if you do have that kind of group insurance or a business number or a charitable number, in which if you write a check to the neighborhood association, you can in fact cash it, I think you would be eligible. If that is not the case, you can certainly connect in with potentially the local school within your neighborhood, or as you've identified in your question, within the city itself. All right. So I see there's a few more questions in the Q&A. So I will answer those. So the question is there a way to know and view the progress of neighborhoods within the municipality? We had the idea of getting neighborhoods to compete with the month, and we're hoping to view our progress and we're the most active neighborhood within our community. So the short, immediate answer to that is not really, but maybe. So one of the things to consider when we're talking about neighborhoods, it really is connected to postal codes. So all of the competing communities are connected by their postal codes. And so some postal codes I'm sure postal codes within cities are going to be, or neighborhoods within cities are going to have multiple postal codes. So that's going to be a little bit tricky. But if you are able to identify from yourself to say, okay, these 6 postal codes are part of neighborhood X and these 7 postal codes are part of neighborhood Y, then we could potentially work with you to help identify those things. But that's where we are limited. We have done some work, as I said, with Amherst with Amherst and Sackville to be able to pull some specific kind of weekly reports for them. But again, it was connected back to that postal code basis. So it's certainly a question we can follow up and learn more about that. So the question is, if you are living in a city of over 1 million people, but are considering participating as a community or group of communities within that city, you are part of Team City and not Team Community of 2,500 homes. Yes, that is correct. And so the Community Builder Challenge competition, when we talk about our competing communities, it levels up to that municipality level. So it would be, Toronto versus Vancouver versus Montreal. And that kind of goes back to the previous question on those neighborhoods or those communities, because all the data that we have is available to us from Statistics Canada and from Canada Post. We can't determine from the sources of data that we have individual neighborhoods within large municipalities. We can just identify the municipalities themselves and all of the postal codes connected therein. There is, so if you're organizing a Community Builder Challenge event, but your postal code is different than where your event is being offered. So I think the answer to that question will come down to in that tracking event. So as an organization, one of the things that we'd ask you is, what is your organization name? What is your organization address? What is your organization postal code? And whatever information you put into that postal code is where the minutes will go for that event. And so if it is a cross-border event, or maybe you have an organization whose head office is based in the capital city of the province, but your event is happening in another city, for that purpose, I would put your organization postal code as where the local event is happening. If there are multiple events happening across multiple locations, you may consider having a local event organizer register for the chapter. So maybe it's we've seen this with the Girl Guides. So maybe it's not Girl Guides of British Columbia, but it's Girl Guides of Kamloops registering their specific event. So there's a question: how can a smaller municipality compete fairly against a city of over 1 million residents? And so this is the full explanation around our scoring formula is available within our terms and conditions, but I'll do my best to summarize it for you now. Throughout the past few challenges, we've taken a look at our scoring formula to help make it as fair and equitable as possible for big and small cities alike. So there's 3 different factors that factor into the first half of determining whether or not you are a Community Builder Challenge finalist. One of those factors is minutes. So how many minutes were tracked by organizations and individuals? A second factor is participation. How many individuals were participating, downloading the Participaction app, tracking their activity, logging their minutes on the Participaction website for a family? So there's individual participation. And then the third factor is organization participation. How many organizations were participating within your competing community? So minutes, organizations, individuals. So we take those 3 factors based just on a pure sum, how many people, and then we do a second, we also take those factors based on it divided by your population. How many minutes divided by your population, how many people divided by your population, how many organizations divided by your population. So it ends up actually being 6 factors that go into that final formula. And that's only the first half. That's the mathematical side of the challenge. The second half is all of those finalists are then invited to submit, and this is at the municipality level, that those finalists are invited to submit a written application that details, they use photos and videos and evidence to identify why they deserve to be Canada's most active community. So between those 6 mathematical things and that finalist more qualitative application is how we determine it. So it is there's a fair chance for both large and smaller municipalities. And if we look at our past winners, in fact, a majority of them tend to be in smaller populations. So there's a question here that says, our organization received a grant last year, and thank you. You're quite welcome. If you're planning a similar event, would it be viewed favorably? And I think you can. That's a very good specific question for our outreach coordinator to go over some of the details of your event. I think one of the things to consider as you're putting in your application this year is if you can think about maybe the dollar requested and the dollar allocated. So maybe your event requested $1,000 and we provided you with $600. If you're planning on hosting a very similar event, you may consider only requesting $600 as an idea. So there's a question, is there a minimum and maximum amount of participants for events? No, there is not. In terms of a maximum, you may need, the answer is going to be based on the public health guidelines. But no, there is no minimum amount of people per event. When you go onto that tracking portal for the Participaction website, it'll just be put in a number. The number can be as low as 1. If there are the ability to do like mega events, I'm thinking about like marathons with 15,000 people, we do put a cap to say only 5,000 or 2,500 people per event. But if your event does exceed that, you can include 2,500 2 times if there was 5,000 people at your event. We just do that as a means of verifying and sort of a bit of an authenticity check. Because it is possible to make fictitious events and use really big numbers, and we want to try and avoid that. So the question is, how do I know if my municipality has applied? And so one of the things to clarify is that your municipality themselves don't actually need to apply to participate in the challenge. Because everything is based on postal codes. So as soon as an individual within the municipality downloads the Participaction app and tracks activity using one of the postal codes connected to that municipality is eligible to win. The more organizations involved, the more individuals involved, the more likely they are to score well within the challenge. Early on in the challenge, so in and around at the end of the first week, Participaction does some direct outreach to those municipalities that are doing well, that are in the top 10 in their province and territory. And we build connections with them, one, to make sure that they're aware, because it's possible that they're not. And so we say, dear recreation programmers, dear leaders, are you aware that one, this challenge exists? We do a lot of outreach in advance. So we hope that most municipalities are aware of this challenge by now, but there's always more people to connect with and more information to share. But they may not know about it at the beginning. But they will know about it by the end, that they are that their community has spoken and that their community is being active. But they do not. There's not sort of a button where they formally need to apply to be considered a competing community. They are already predetermined. Yes, so that's a very good comment. A question, can you please post the link for the Community Debater Challenge grant website to this chat? I'll have one of my colleagues be able to post that for you. Do keep in mind that the link, so when you go to that website right now, you'll be able to see a few things. You'll be able to see the grant guidelines, the offline grant questions. You'll be able to see a frequently asked questions page in our competing communities list at the bottom in the resource section. You won't be able to actually apply yet. So you'll have to come back to the website on Monday. And then there'll be a big button probably right at the top center to say apply now for a grant, and then you'll be on your way. So another question is, would it benefit the grant application process if organizations included cost estimates of potential expenses? Yes. Yes, it's certainly helpful to know, and it certainly shows that you have thought this through or run similar events in the past. You have an idea of what you're asking for is what you need. There's another question: would a community project such as a neighborhood cleanup count for this grant? We got many people involved and tracked how many steps and minutes we walked. That answer is a big, enthusiastic yes. When Participaction talks about physical activity, we talk far more beyond, sport and recreation. So any sort of activity, be it trail building or gardening or community cleanups, if people are up and moving and active, all of that counts in the realm of physical activity. So yes, to help to help your own personal health, to get some outdoor time and to clean up the environment is a great win. All right, not seeing any more questions come through. I hope I hope that you've enjoyed your time with me. I certainly have enjoyed sharing some time with you. I'll leave it there for today. My contact information is on the site there, kzolitar@participaction.com. My phone number is 416-644-0498. I can't stress enough how much I appreciate phone calls and chatting and really connecting with you as organizational leaders and community leaders to see how we can make this event as successful as possible. So thank you again for your time and attention. I wish you all a very happy and healthy rest of your day. Take care.